and welcome to the next installment. So here we're going to talk about an introduction into all things human systems biology. So let's get started. So we need to first define what anatomy is. Anatomy is talking about the structure of something, whereas physiology is talking about the function. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you were running a race and you've got two little legs and you're running. Well, you could run a race, right? But what happens if you get one of your legs chopped off? Well, you wouldn't be able to do a running, right? You would have to hop. So again, the structure determines the function. Same thing in our heart. We have a 4-chambered heart. Why? Because it's the most efficient. But what happens if we were born where we only had 3 chambers or 2 chambers? Ooh. Yeah, we're not going to be able to run around as much. We're not going to be able to live the way that we're meant to be living because, again, and that is not the structure that then determines the function. So very importantly, this is a key phrase. Anatomy dictates physiology. So the structure of something is going to determine how it works. So again, this is going to be an important phrase to look at. Anatomy dictates physiology. Okay, keep that in your mind because we're going to keep coming back to that time and time again. Another thing that we need to actually understand right now is that this science of anatomy and physiology is continuing to evolve. Why? Because we're continually to evolving our understanding of the human body by developing new technologies to be able to see further into the body. So we look more at a microscopic level, at a macromolecule level, at the molecular side to it. We've gone from going, oh, it's a human body, we'll put a leech on it, to we can now understand our genes, we can do gene editing, we can do all sorts of things, which is really pretty amazing. Think about if you had a broken bone. Before the x-ray, what would you do? You assumed it was broken. But now we've got x-ray, we've got MRIs, we've got CAT scans, we've got functional MRIs, we've got nuclear medicine. We can look really deep into where the problem is and understand the function of the body. So it's a continuing evolving science, which is really awesome. Now, what's also really awesome is if you had already had Greek or Latin in your former education, in your former years, this will help you to set up your understanding of the terminology that we're going to use. Yes, I'm afraid you've got a whole new language to learn here, and it's going to be very important that you understand it, which means that if you've got an understanding of Greek or Latin, you've got good fundamentals. Now, if you're going to go into medicine, it's actually really advisable to take a lesson in Latin. You can get FLVS that does Latin courses, and I'm told they're actually not too bad. Okay, keep going. So, oh my goodness, this could be a little bit, what is all of this? Well, this is the hierarchy of life. So if we look at the organism and the human body here, and we go backwards, what does it all boil down to? Well, in reality, it all boils down to the fact that we're made up of atoms. Loads and loads and loads, trillions and trillions of atoms. Whew. And we've got to explain each of these levels now. So we could, and you can pause it here if you want to read this, go through each of these and this slide and this slide, but I prefer doing it a different way. But you could pause and go back and read these if you would like. We're going to look at the whole organism and then how it would then go into a population, a community, an ecosystem, and a biosphere, but that's a different course. So we're just going to leave it at the human organism. So let's start. We have an atom. The atom is made up of subatomic particles. These are, as you should know, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now, what's important to note here is it is the number of protons that is going to determine the identity of the element. So let's say I have 6 protons. Well, that's carbon. If I have 8, that's oxygen. If I have 3 protons, that's lithium. So the number of protons determines the identity of the element or the atom. There are certain atoms that we have within our body that are more abundant than others, and so it's worthwhile pointing out a few. So in the human body, we have our basic fundamentals are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And it should be pointed out right now that remember we said carbon made us an organic life form. Yes, it does. And I'm sure that that's what you were thinking too. All right, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. These are our fundamentals. And phosphorus too. Okay. But then we also have to think about, why do we have all these extra elements like calcium? Well, your strong teeth and bones, calcium. That's also used in muscle movements. Iron. Why do we need that? Well, that helps to carry our oxygen molecule in our blood and deliver it. Magnesium, again, helps with muscles, helps with brain. Zinc, brain immunity. It also helps with your balance. Chlorine, sodium, potassium, sulfur, all of these are really important within your body. And you need to make sure you have them at the right levels. How do you get them? Good balanced diet. All right, so these atoms, they come together and they form a molecule. Now, these molecules can be made together with either ionic bonding or covalent bonding. Now, remember that in ionic bonding, this is the give and take of electrons, and this is going to be between a metal and a non-metal. So here we've got sodium chloride as an example of an ionic bonded molecule within the body. Covalent bonding is sharing. Sharing is caring, and caring begins with C. So covalent bonding here, you've got water, glucose, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, just to name a few. I hope there's a little alarm bell going off in your head going, oh, look, those make up cellular respiration. Well, at least if it didn't, it should do. Okay, so these molecules come together to form macromolecules. Macro, the prefix, means big, enormous. So these are these molecules that are strung together to make enormous, large molecules. Now, there are 4 different types of macromolecules. So the first type we'll talk about are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are useful for short-term energy, and they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay. The second type of macromolecule, again has mainly to do with energy, is a lipid. A lipid is involved in long-term energy, but that's not it. Lipids also help with protection and with insulation. So if you have a lot of fat on your body, you tend to keep hotter than somebody else that doesn't have any fat on their body. They tend to be colder. If you bump your elbow or you bump your bum, which one's going to hurt more? Well, your elbow. Why? Because it's got less protection. It doesn't have very much adipose tissue. Why do babies have chunky thighs and chunky butts? Because when they fall as they're learning to walk, it doesn't hurt them so much. And that extra storage there helps them with their energy spurts. To help them grow and develop. Okay, now here's the weird thing, right? These lipids are made up of the same elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but they're connected together differently, and they act differently than our carbohydrates. So that's the important point. Okay, let's keep going. So carbohydrates, lipids. The third one is proteins. Now, proteins are so important. They basically do everything. They're there for energy. They're there for storage. They're there for building parts of your cells. They're there for building up your muscles. They're there for enzymes that control metabolic reactions. They transport. They do, well, as I said, everything. If you think something's going on in the body, there's probably a protein that's involved some way, some shape, somehow. Okay. They are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but notice they've got nitrogen, and that's going to be very important later on, so store that in the brain bank. Here we go. Now, after proteins, we also have nucleic acids. Now, these nucleic acids are for our genetic information, such as mRNA, DNA, RNA in itself, right? This gives the code. What's it coding for? Proteins! It codes for which proteins to make. Oh, that's cool. Now, we have to remember that they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and it's got that added phosphorus. Okay. So because proteins are so important, we're going to take an aside and have a little delve into proteins for a moment. I know we're talking about the hierarchy of life, but we really have to focus on proteins right now. So proteins are super important. They're used in cells, components of cells, making cells. They're the protein, remember, that's going to make up our hair and our nails, keratin, based upon how it folds, right? So we're now also going to talk about that they're used for enzymes. These control all of our chemical reactions and they initiate them. Look at that, clotting, antibodies, so on and so forth and so on and so forth. So important. So that's why we really need to make sure we understand it. So proteins are made up of monomers. The monomer is the building block, and this monomer, one unit, is an amino acid. There are 20 different amino acids that are strung together to make the polymer, which then gets made into the protein. Now, these amino acids, as I said, there are 20 of them. 9 of them we cannot make. We must ingest, eat them. Okay, we have to take them into our diet, which is why it's really important to understand this if you are vegetarian or vegan, because a lot of these essential amino acids, they come from meat diet. So they come from animal products, being eggs or beef or chicken or fish or something along those lines. And if you're vegan, you might struggle to get these essential amino acids. So you make sure that if you have a restricted diet in some way, shape or form, make sure you're getting these essential amino acids into it. Okay, let's go back. Our amino acids, these are our monomers. They are going to be strung together like beads on a necklace, okay? These beads on a necklace are linked, not with string, but rather with peptide bonds. And these monomers, the amino acids, link together based upon how many it's directed by the genetic material to form a polypeptide. Not a protein yet, just a polypeptide, poly meaning many. So these are strung together and then they fold. So this primary structure of the amino acids linked together to form the polypeptide is the primary structure. They're then going to either helix, like the DNA, it twists on itself, or they're going to pleat like a fan. And this is the secondary structure. It's not a protein yet. It's just the secondary structure. Then it moves into the tertiary structure, where that folds on itself to form a particular structure. And it's at this point that it is a protein. There's an extra step though. It can actually take these tertiary structures and glob them together to form a quaternary structure. And again, this is just a bigger built out protein that is made up of multiple proteins that work together in one unit. Okay, so have you noticed that the folding here is really important? You should do, because this is the key part. The folding makes the protein. Okay. Have you ever wondered why an egg fries and changes colour when it's on a hot pavement or maybe in a frying pan? Have you ever put an egg in a freezer and it comes out looking like it's cooked? Well, why? It's because the protein has denatured. This means that the protein, based upon the temperature change, has either too hot in a frying pan or too cold in the freezer, has changed and unraveled or changed shape. I do hope that this rings a bell. Anatomy dictates physiology. So the structure of the protein is going to determine how it functions. So if the structure changes, it is no longer going to function the way that it was designed or intended to, and it's not going to work. Oh, well, does this denaturing have anything to do with us rather than just, cooking an egg? The answer is very much so. So, have you ever wondered why you get a fever when you get sick? Well, the reasoning is that as your body temperature increases, it denatures, and it's intended to denature the proteins of the pathogen, the disease-causing agent, so that you can kill off the proteins of that and it no longer can replicate and make you sick anymore. But have you ever wondered what would happen if you got a fever that was too high or for too long? It's going to start denaturing you. So there is that fine balance between having a fever to kill off the bacteria or the virus that's making you sick and then causing yourself damage. So keep that in mind. But it's very clever, no? Right? Wow, pretty cool that our body does all of this. So what else happens? What else would be important to know about denaturing? Well, have you ever been burnt? I do hope not. But if you got sunburnt, or maybe you touched something, or you got poured water on and you got a burn to your skin, it has denatured the proteins within your skin. And there are different degrees of burns, but the same treatment. Don't ever pop a blister. Don't ever put oils or margarine or butter on it. No. Quite simply, you're going to put the burned area, if you can and if it's small enough, and run it under cool, not warm, not cold, not ice water, just cool water. And you're going to let that run for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. And it helps to extract the heat so that it helps to prevent more of your cells denaturing, because cells are basically proteins. And we don't want this heat making it change, because it's going to cause damage. You could also end up going to the doctors because they've got some special medicine that can help put on that helps with burns. But certainly don't ever pop a blister, because that blister's there to help protect the underlying skin. Whether it's a friction blister from having shoes that don't fit you so well, or from having burnt water on, not so good. Well, that's heat. What about cold? Would that cause a problem for us? Ever heard of frostbite? Oh yes, that's when it gets too cold. And again, it denatures our protein, and you can lose your fingertips, your nose, or any exposed area that's getting less and less circulation because the blood going away from the surface, and then the temperature change is going to denature. Yikes. Okay, so keep your body temperature normal. But what else could denature our proteins? Well, change in pH would be another thing. So this here is a nasty chemical burn from nitric acid, and ouch, right? You can see how the skin has scarred and it has denatured that protein because it got a burn from it. Do we use it for anything else? Have you ever had ceviche? This is when you cook your raw fish or seafood using lemon juice or lime juice or an acid, and it doesn't actually cook it per se with heat, but rather it cooks it with the acidic pH. Well, is it only acids? No. Unfortunately, you can get terrible burns using a base as well. That's why there's all those big warnings on like oven cleaner sprays, because that's a really strong caustic base. Bleach is another one. Well, that's going to be a problem, right? Look at that poor hair and the scalp. Ouch. And this is usually the time when I admit that I have been a silly sausage in my lifetime. A mega silly sausage. So, how and why? Well, when I was in college, we had a dorm that I stayed in with about 15 other girls on this one floor that had one shower and 2 toilets. Yikes. And our cleaning lady, as gorgeous as she was so nice and friendly, but she was not allowed to clean with anything stronger than, let's say, detergent, dish soap. So it wasn't very clean. And our shower had some black mold in. Yikes. It was really pretty grim. So in my ultimate wisdom and kindness out of my heart, I thought I would clean it. So I went to the store and I bought a bucket and a scrub brush and some bleach, and I put in my Walkman and I was cleaning and dancing, and it was all great and groovy. And then I peeled off my gloves after I cleaned the shower, and I noticed I had enormous blisters down both my forearms because the bleach water had run under my gloves and had got on my skin, and my heat had evaporated some of the water and it made it stronger, and the bleach solution just burnt my skin. I had to end up at the doctor's office at the clinic on campus, and they treated me for 2nd-degree burns, or even 3rd-degree burns in places, and bandaged my arms up, and they were incredibly painful. So if ever you are going to be a cleaning person, please be cautious and always make sure that it's not running underneath and onto your skin and being there for prolonged periods of time. So is change of pH always bad? Well, no. We actually utilize it very much so for digestion. So that's a really important part. We like this change of pH for digestive purposes, but we have to be careful it is not too much and in the wrong place. Okay, so let's look back at our hierarchy of life. We can see that we've gone from atom to molecule to macromolecule. Now we need to keep going. So proteins were really important, so are the others, but proteins are really important. So now, atoms, molecules, macromolecules, and it goes to organelles. Organelles, make sure you remember these from biology, but organelles, they're going to vary in their function. And I hope you understand that these are the individual workers of inside the cell. Each organelle has its own specific function. So, for example, the nucleus, it holds the genetic information. Inside the nucleus is the nucleolus, and that makes ribosomes. And ribosomes are super important because they are going to make the proteins. We've got the endoplasmic reticulum, we've got the Golgi apparatus and the vesicles. These are going to be to do with synthesis of chemical reactions, and particularly with the Golgi apparatus, they're going to be sorting, packaging and delivering the proteins. We also have, I like these guys, the lysosomes. These lysosomes act like garbage men of the cell. They clean it up to make sure that their waste is removed. I kind of like thinking that somebody else or something else is doing the cleaning up rather than me. And then everybody remembers that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. They're going to make ATP, our adenosine triphosphate, which is made by cellular respiration. So C6H12O6 plus O2 yields CO2 plus H2O plus ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If you're not very, very familiar with these organelles, it would be really wise of you to go back and review your notes from biology, or go to a place like cellsalive.com and research what all of these organelles are. Okay, so these organelles are going to vary in function, but they work together for the good of the cell. And that makes up a cell. Remember that we are eukaryotic because we contain membrane-bound organelles, not prokaryotic like bacteria or an archaebacteria that don't have these membrane-bound organelles. Remember also that cells are the basic unit of life. Now, if we look inside our body, we would actually see cells that range in size from little to huge. And they also vary in which concentration of organelles they have inside of them. So let's say, for example, that I take a cardiac cell. One of my heart is going to beat, 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 and we want it to keep beating. So which organelle do you think would be in higher concentration than, let's say, in a liver cell? Did you guess the mitochondria? Because you would be right, because the mitochondria needs to generate lots of energy in order to keep my heart beating. Whereas the liver cell may not have as many mitochondria, but it would have more lysosomes. Why? Because the liver is involved in detoxification. So this is going to help clean up the blood, and to do so, it needs lysosomes. How about a sperm cell? That's a trick question. It actually has both the lysosomes and the mitochondria. Why? Because the lysosomes are actually modified, called an acrosome at the head of the sperm, that eats away at the female egg's defense system so it can bury in. And the mitochondria is needed to generate lots of energy in order for that tail of the sperm to swim. So they're going to vary in size and functions and type of organelles, which, hang on a second, does that trigger anatomy dictates physiology to you? Because it should. The structure determines the function. So the structure of the cell shape and the contents of the organelles are going to determine how it works. Cool. Now these cells, they come together to form tissues. And these tissues are defined as a group of cells working together for one function. So you've got all sorts of different tissue: nerve tissue, cardiac tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, connective tissue, so on and so forth. Okay. Now these tissues come together to form organs. Now, these organs are a group of tissues that are working together for one function. So if we took our heart, for example, the heart is made up of connective tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and electrical nerve tissue. And these are all working together for the functionality of this organ. Okay. Now, these organs go together to make an organ system, of which there are 11. So this is a group of organs working together for one function. So there are 11 organs of the human body. You have to know this, okay? Big hello, hello, hello. You must memorize these 11 systems of the human body. They will be on your test. Very important. This is the fundamental part of the rest of the course. So let's make sure that you understand. A way to help remember these 11 systems is using this memory device. Run, Mr. Sliced. That each letter stands for a system. So Run, Mr. Sliced stands for respiratory, urinary, nervous, muscular, reproductive, skeletal, lymphatic, integumentary, cardiovascular, endocrine, and digestive. So Run, Mr. Slice. Respiratory, urinary, nervous, muscular, reproductive, skeletal, lymphatic, integumentary, cardiovascular, endocrine, and digestive. You need to know it, and you need to be able to rattle it off really quickly. Respiratory, urinary, nervous, muscular, reproductive, skeletal, lymphatic, integumentary, cardiovascular, endocrine, and digestive. Okay, this is going to be the key fundamentals of the rest of this course. So that combined with cellular respiration, really, really, really important, will be on your tests. Okay. So these organ systems, all 11, are going to come together to make an organism, okay? And these are all the systems working together in harmony to make you as a human individual. Then again, we can talk about a population, which is a group of organisms functioning in one place and one time. Then you get the communities with all the different types of populations. Then you get the ecosystem with the abiotic and biotic factors. And then you get the ecosystem going to a biosphere and so on and so forth. But let's just leave it at the organism. Okay? Okay, so if you've made it this far, make sure you take a little break and that you're following that 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, make sure you're looking 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Give your eyeballs a little bit of a rest and make sure you stretch, get some blood flow back, because otherwise it's going to pool all at your bottom and you need more of it back to your brain. So once you've had a good stretch, little exercise, maybe a breath in the sunshine, come back and we'll keep going. Okay, so let's talk about each of these systems on their own. The first one we're going to talk about is the integumentary system. Why first? Because it's the outermost layer. And so this includes the hair, the skin, the nails. And we've already talked about the hair and the nails. And remember that they're made up of the same protein, keratin. Depending upon how it's folded, it's how it functions. Anatomy dictates physiology. And we talked about the 6 main functions of hair. So make sure you're familiar with that. Now, our skin, really, really important. In fact, it's the largest organ we have in our body. And it does so much for us. And we take it for granted all the time. So our skin itself, under some of the layers, we have some sweat glands. Now these sweat glands are going to help to produce sweat. And we talked about how when we licked the back of a hand and blew on it, it got cooler. Why? Because the temperature gets wicked away quicker from a wet surface, which is why we sweat when we're really hot. Now, that helps with our endothermic regulation and maintaining our body temperature at 98.6 plus or minus 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Ooh, I hope you remember. Now, the sebaceous glands, this might be a term that you haven't heard of yet. But these are the glands that are underneath our skin layer that produce oil. Now, that oil helps to keep your hands and the rest of your skin supple and flexible and waterproofed and just keep it in good shape. So we like that. But do you realize that these sebaceous glands become overactive when you hit puberty, which is why you might clog up those pores and get acne? You can also get those overly active and get clogging of the pores, particularly depending upon your diet. So if it's very high in sugar, that can also affect how our pores get clogged and the bacteria and causing acne. So not only can hormones influence your state of your skin, but so can your diet. As you get older, so your grandparents or even sometimes your parents, they may have skin that's a little more frail, a little more dry, a little more likely to bruise easier, thinner. And this could be because the amount of sebaceous glands activity is reduced as we get older. Again, hormones are controlling the amount that these are going to be made. And as we get older, particularly women after they go through menopause, as they go through the stopping of their cycle, the amount of sebaceous gland activity decreases and you're more likely to have dry skin. Okay, so let's go back to the functions of the skin. Super, super important. It's there to help with protection. So let's say you go out and about and all of a sudden the wind kicks up and you get hit by a stick. Well, thank goodness the stick bounces off you and it doesn't impale you. Why? Because our skin is very protective. But it's not only protecting against big things like sticks, but it's also protecting against smaller things like pathogens, disease-causing agents like bacteria, viruses, fungi, even allergens like pollens and pollutants. It prevents it from getting into our body, which is really important. We're very grateful for that, right? But it doesn't just protect against the outside environment in terms of stopping as a barrier. It also is involved in protection against the environment such as sunlight. Now, our skin is really important at absorbing sunlight, not for energy like a plant. We don't photosynthesize. You need the sunlight for vitamin D, as in D as in dog, right? We need vitamin D to be absorbed by our skin in the sunlight. But too much of the sun's rays will cause damage to our skin, and that's not a good thing, which might be why you wonder, why is it that people have different colors of skin? Well, it's to do with the melanin that is in their skin. So let's have a look at this image here. If you see on this arrow right here, the middle one, the distance between the sun's rays and the equator is significantly shorter than this one here, which is at one of the poles. So the distance being shorter between the sun and the curvature of the earth means the intensity of the sunlight is greater. So in order to protect against that greater intensity of light, our skin evolved to have a greater pigmentation of melanin to help protect. But people that live up in the north area, like northern Scotland or Finland or Scandinavian countries, they tend to have very pale skin, blonde eyes, blue eyes, blonde hair. Why? So that it can allow for more absorption of light, because we need the vitamin D and the rays are less when it comes into the, say, Scandinavia or the UK. But in the equator region, the fattest part of the earth, the rays are much darker, rays are much stronger, so your skin is much darker to protect against it. So if you took somebody who has got very dark skin and you plop them in the north of Scotland, they might actually become vitamin D deficient because their skin is protecting them too much against the weak sun that's coming in, and they're not able to absorb as much sunlight. Who'd have thought? So the only difference is as an evolutionary mechanism to protect against the sun rays as to why we have darker or lighter skin. Pretty cool. Okay, so protection. We said protection against stuff coming in, but it also protects stuff going out. If you have all of a sudden a hole, your stuff can fall out. Well, we don't want that. This acts as a barrier to make sure that nothing comes in and all your stuff that's inside doesn't go out. Okay. We also need this protection for water. Water is such a hot commodity. We need water for everything. We need water for chemical reactions. We need water to make our skin look nice and plump. We need water for making sure you poop, to pee. We need water for all our chemical reactions. We even need water for our eyeballs, right? So water is essential. So we don't want to be outside and all of a sudden we lose all our water. And conversely, we don't want to go in the shower and all of a sudden absorb all the water and you have to wring yourself out like a sponge. That wouldn't be so good. So we need to maintain this water balance, and our skin does a great job of doing that. We've already talked about how our skin helps us with endothermic regulation, regulating our body temperature, 98.6 plus or minus 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit, right? This is whereby it allows the blood vessels to come to the surface and dilate when we're hot. And when we're cold, they constrict and move away from the surface to conserve the heat. How we can have the hair stick up on end to help with when we're cold, it traps the air against us, or when we're really hot, we'll sweat or pant, right? So this helps to regulate our body temperatures. And the last one that we have here is that it's helpful for sensory. We touch and we feel with our hands, and lots of our skin is involved in sensory receiving. And basically on the outside of us is what we can receive input into the world from the world into our brain so we can respond appropriately. Okay, so this is where I am going to tell you about my claim to fame. I am not an alien, but I don't have a belly button. I have never had a belly button. I'm fascinated with belly buttons. Belly buttons are the coolest thing. When you go, ugh, what is that? And it's belly button fluff. Just think Dr. Pearman would have loved to have seen belly button fluff. I'm just enamored with it. Did you know you can actually make cheese out of the bacteria that you collect in your belly button? Gentlemen are more likely to get belly button fluff than ladies due to the hair around their belly. Can you tell that I'm fascinated by belly buttons? Well, the reason why I don't have one is because I was born, quite literally, inside out. So when I was born back many years ago in the UK, they didn't have ultrasound at the time. So I was a surprise. When I came out, there was my head and there was the rest of me, and then out came all of my intestines because I had a hole in my abdominal wall just to the side of my umbilical cord, and because the integumentary system hadn't closed properly, all of my intestine had spilled out and grew and developed in the amniotic sac outside of me and still kind of connected. And so they were floating around, my guts were floating around in the amniotic sac. Well, back then they didn't know what it was. I was incredibly lucky that there was a resident house doctor, so it was a junior doctor who had been from another hospital who had seen the other case in the UK. Like, it's really rare. Had seen the other case in the UK that year and knew what it was. Nobody else knew what it was. None of the senior doctors. They'd never seen it before. And it's called gastroschisis. This is where, as you are growing and developing, so sperm and egg, they fuse together to make a zygote. This one cell then divides into two, two into four, four into eight, so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you've got this cell mass that grows and joins in the middle. Well, for some reasons, some people don't always join in the middle, and I was one of them. And I had a hole in my abdominal wall, and all my guts fell out. My aunt, she didn't join properly down the middle, and she had a cleft lip. And my cousin, or my second cousin, he had a hole in the heart where his heart didn't join properly. And he also had gastroschisis, the same as me, where his abdomen didn't join properly. So he had two holes. And they say it's not genetic. And yet we have 3 close relatives all with this, which is kind of weird. Anyway, so the not joining in the middle, I came out. And my parents are like, what the heck happened here? And the doctors are like, we don't know. And thankfully, there was somebody who was like, I know what this is. And they turned around to my parents and they said, well, you've got 5 minutes to decide whether or not we try to save her or she will die. Thankfully, obviously, they tried to save me and it worked. But why did they only have 5 minutes? Well, it was because the integumentary system had failed. And so because it had failed, there was a hole, what was meant to be inside was outside. And that would have allowed for massive water loss. And I would have died from either dehydration or hypothermia. I would have lost all of my body temperature from not having my integumentary system sealed over the top. Ruh-roh. And if that hadn't killed me, then I would have got an infection very quickly and would have died from an infection. So thankfully they're like, well, let's give it a try. And so they stuck me in a plastic bag tied loosely around my neck. Why? Because that was now the barrier. That was now acting to keep everything, well, kind of in place. It was also helping to conserve water. They stuck me in an incubator which regulated my body temperature and put me in an ambulance and drove me to London. Now, my dad followed in his car and he said it was the best and the worst drive of his life. Why was it the best? Because he got to drive really, really, really fast. And the worst because, well, he didn't know if I was alive or dead in this back of the ambulance. Now, I was born in a very small little cottage hospital in the south of England, and the drive, they got me to London very quickly, and at 3 hours old, they christened me, so that's why my name's Amanda. My mum actually wanted to call me Holly or Abigail, but my dad was there, and they're like, well, she probably won't survive, let's better christen her, so my dad was like, let's call her Amanda. Why? Because it rhymes with Samantha, and that was my sister. He was not very unique with his naming. So anyway, they opened up the small hole, made it a bit bigger, and shoved all my intestines back in and sewed me up. So I lost my belly button. Yes, I had to have had one in order to have the umbilical cord, which is what it was, connect to me. But because they had to open up and stuff everything back in, then I lost a belly button. I had a big scar with 16 tension stitches either side. So I had 16 teeny little belly buttons, not a big one like most normal people. So why am I telling you this? Okay, well, the reason why I was going to die very quickly was because the integumentary system had failed. Well, how else could it fail? Well, hopefully you don't have a child like me that didn't form properly. But what about if you burn yourself and you now broken down that skin, or you get a cut, right? Or you get a blister. Never pop a blister, even if it is from rubbing shoes. Why? Because you're opening up that integumentary system and you're preventing it from being the functioning part that it needs to be to protect and act as the barrier and regulate temperature and so on and so forth. So it's really important that we look after our integumentary system. And one of the best things that you can do to keep your integumentary system good, drink some water. Water is really important for our systems, and keep out of the sunshine to a certain degree, right? As I said, we need some sunlight, but we don't want to be getting too much sun because it can be damaging. So the integumentary system, pretty awesome. Now, if you did get a burn, this is kind of cool. If, let's say, unfortunately, a pot of water falls on your leg and it was boiling water and now you've got this massive burn, you're going to be put into a special unit in the hospital, and a burn ward, right? Or a burn unit, as they call it over here. And they will put you in a sterilized environment, and everybody that comes in is really watching their sterilization, making sure that they're as clean as possible, because you no longer have that integumentary system in place that is acting as a barrier and preventing you from getting the infection in. The second thing is that they're going to put you, also with lots of medication, because it's going to be incredibly painful, but they're going to put you on a bed that is going to regulate your temperature. So there'll be cooling beds and heat lamps, because you're not going to be able to regulate your own temperature because your integumentary system has been compromised. And then they're also going to make sure that you have enough fluids, because you're most likely going to lose a lot of fluids through this wound. You know, the coolest thing that they're doing now is that they are using fish therapy. And I don't mean they take a fish and come and give you kisses with fishes. No, they actually do that for your feet. They can actually put your feet in baths of water, and they have fish come and nibble your feet, and they give you a pedicure. Okay, that was an aside. But for the fish, they take medical grade tilapia, and they skin it, and they put the skin over the burnt area, and it helps act as a barrier. It helps to increase the collagen and the healing and the repairing, and it helps with sealing it all in, and it's really cool. No, you don't grow scales, but it's an amazing advantage is that they're coming up with. Again, the integumentary system, who'd have thunk it, that it is so important. Well, I'm very grateful for my integumentary system, I can tell you that. Okay, let's talk about the skeletal system. Now, with the skeletal system, this is what you would think of as bones. Well, it's true, it is bones, but there's a little bit more to that. So the bones are connected to one another with bone to bone. It's going to be a ligament, right? So do you see where I've put blob and bottom? Blob stands for bone, ligament, bone. So what's bottom then? That's bone, tendon, muscle. So this is a really good way of remembering. Bone, tendon, muscle. So muscles are connected to bones and they use a tendon. But bone to bone, like in between our fingers and our knuckles here, that's going to be a ligament. Now, on the ends of our bones, we have something called cartilage. And this cartilage helps to prevent friction, which, as you know, if we rub our hands together, it gets really hot. Well, if we didn't have that cartilage there, if we were running, let's say, we'd generate so much heat, we would denature our joints. We would denature our bones because we'd have too much heat. So that cartilage helps to break it down. But we also see cartilage where else? Give your nose a wiggle, right? The tip of your nose. Give your ear a little wiggle, particularly up at the top of your ear. That's cartilage. And cartilage is there not only as a reducing friction, but it's also there to provide structure. Interesting fact about cartilage, it is the slowest healing tissue in the entire body because it does not have a direct blood supply. It gets all of its nutrients from the cells neighboring it, and so it takes a while for all of the nutrients to go through the one cell and then to the cartilage, which is why if you get this part of your ear pierced up here, it can take 6 months or so to heal, whereas if you got this one down here pierced, it would only take about 6 weeks. Because you got less down here, but significant cartilage up here. Okay, so other than making ears and tips of noses, what else are we needing all of this cartilage for? Reducing bones from wear and tear, but what else do we need bones for? Okay, well, let's go ahead. Do you think you could poke your brain for me? No. Why not? Because there's a big skull there, and it's made of bone. Okay, well, could you please poke your heart? Nope, why not? Again, bone there. And the other most important organ, your lungs? Nope, rib cage can't get there, it's bones. So one of the first things we have to understand is that bones are going to be there for protection. See the picture and the top, you see that knight in shining armor, well, his armor at least. What did they put on? They put on a breastplate and they put on a helmet. Why? Because these are the most needed to be protected organs. And what do we have there? A whole lot of bone, which is, again, internal protection. The suit of armor is there to help with the external protection. Okay. So not only is it going to provide protection, really important, but it's also really important for the attachment of muscles. So if we were, go ahead and put your arm out, and I want to see if I can get this in the camera. All right, so I've got my arm here, and I'm going to make a little bicep curl. And with my finger in the crook of my arm, right here, I want to feel, can you feel it? It feels like string in there, like almost like you pluck it, right? That is, what do you think? A tendon, right? This is a tendon right here that is connecting my muscle to my bone, my forearm. Okay, well, here's a word to the wise. If you like to lift weights, and you're lifting weights, it could be problematic. There are cases whereby if you lift weights too heavy for your body, that tendon can snap. And if it snaps, your bicep is going to go and roll up like a fruit roll up and stick in the top of your shoulder. And your arm will not be able to move up. It can move down, but it's not going to be able to move up anymore because this muscle here, the bicep, is no longer connected to your forearm. But your tricep is connected, so it can go out, but it can no longer pull up because this muscle is no longer connected to this forearm. Incredibly painful, and they would have to go in and surgically reattach it, and it's a really long process of healing, so not so good. Okay, I usually ask this question, and I'm not being sexist here, but typically gentlemen answer this in a very similar way. If you were asked to bring the groceries in from the car, how many trips are you going to make? And 9 times out of 10, the gentleman will always say one trip. You're going to load up all your arms with as many shopping bags as you can carry. You're only making that one trip from the car to the kitchen to drop off all of the groceries. Well, a friend of mine, gentleman friend of mine, did the same thing. He was carrying his in, and then all of a sudden partially tore his tendon. And we'd gone out for dinner with him and his girlfriend at the time, and we noticed that he wasn't using his arm very much, and part of it looked like Popeye with a big bulge right here. And it's like, what happened? And he didn't want to tell us. And eventually he told us it was because, well, he was carrying in his groceries, and he had bought a whole lot of canned goods, and well, he partially tore his tendon, and it took a while for it to heal. Poor gentleman. Anyway. So word to the wise, be careful when you're carrying in the groceries. Take as many trips as it needs to be safe. Okay, so not only do our bones allow for protection, they also allow for points of attachment for our muscles. They also are going to help with the production of blood cells. So inside our bones, particularly our long bones, like in our thighs or the femur, right? These bones here inside have a bone marrow that is going to help to produce, or cells in there are going to help to produce both our red blood cells and our white blood cells. Very important for blood production. It's also that marrow is going to be useful for storing inorganic salts. So really a lot more goes into the skeletal system than you would think. Okay. So the muscular system, why are these back to back? Well, because the muscular system is going to be very much intertwined with the skeletal system, because again, remember, we've got these muscles that are attached to bones. If those muscles don't attach to the bones, there is going to be no movement. You're just going to be a pile of ooey gooey mess on the floor, right? There is going to be very limited movement. So within the muscular system, we're looking at muscles. They allow us to have movement, both internally and externally. That is because there are 3 different types of muscles. I need you to know this. There is smooth muscle. Now, this is going to be the muscle that's inside our blood vessels, inside our intestines, inside of our organs. This is going to be muscles that we don't think about moving. Like if you just had some food, yum, 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 and you've swallowed it, you're not thinking, okay, stomach, here we go, push it around, grind it up, now into the small intestine, can we keep going? Your body does it automatically, thankfully, right? But it's those muscles that are squeezing that are going to be smooth muscles that are involuntary, completely controlled by the brain. You don't think about it, it's a subconscious thing, and involuntary muscles. There is another involuntary muscle in your heart. This is the second type of muscle grouping called cardiac muscle, and it beats without us thinking about it, completely involuntary, controlled by our brain. Cool. So smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. The third type, whoa, balloons. The third type is going to be the skeletal muscle, which we've already talked about. Skeletal, I don't care how you say it. I forget which one's British, which one's American. You can tell me if you figure it out. So our muscles are attached to bones, and this allows me to move. Not only move my hands, my arms, but enabling me to move my face and to talk because I've got muscles attached to it. Now, these are voluntary. I can voluntarily move my hands move my face, right? Because I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about moving it. Okay. Now, there are a couple of muscles that we don't think about that happen automatically, but there are some that we can actually override. Can you think of any? I wonder. Actually, yeah, that was my hint. It was the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a big, thick muscle that runs underneath our lungs, right? And that is going to be the one that is going to pull open and close to allow us to breathe, okay? And so this muscle, we don't think about breathing, but if I've just told you, hey, we're thinking about breathing and you're holding your breath, or that you're breathing, how quickly do you breathe? Do you breathe now? How about now? How deeply do you breathe? How quick, right? Your brain is now going, I'm thinking about breathing. What's wrong with this picture? Okay, don't worry. Your brain is going to switch back off in a second and it'll take back over, which will be a good thing because you can't really be doing two things at once. The other thing that you're involuntary that can become voluntary, what do you think it could be? Yep, I gave you a little hint. Your eyes, right? You can blink. You can close your eyes. You can keep them closed. You can just stare in competition. Right? All of this because your eyes typically are going to be blinking by themselves naturally. You don't think about it, but you can override it, right? Have you stopped thinking about your breathing yet? Oh, no. Are you thinking about breathing and blinking? Which one do you do when? Oh, no. Don't worry. Your brain's going to take back over in just a minute. Okay, so not only are we going to do this with movement, but we also need to make sure that we have muscles to allow us to have good posture. So hopefully you're sat up nice and tall, your feet are flat on the floor, your butt's in the back of the chair, you're sitting up nice, because if not, you're going to have an issue. So I always ask people, and imagine this while you're at home, you do this yourself, right? That I want you to imagine that you've been given a plate of spaghetti or your favorite soup and you've got it right in front of you. Can you smell it? It tastes good, right? You're about to go eat it. So I want you to imagine, and you act it out. Nobody's looking, right? Act it out. How are you going to eat this soup? How are you going to eat this spaghetti? Now, if you are sitting up and you're not doing it right because you are a teenager and you don't sit there properly and eat your soup, you hunch over and you why? Because you're a hungry teenager, and that's what hungry teenagers do. Okay, why am I making this point? Because imagine, I hope you've used a garden hose before. Okay, so imagine you've got this garden hose and you make it all nice and long and straight and you turn the faucet on and the water comes out. But then you take it and you get a kink in it. What happens to the water? And there's no water. Because there's a kink in it. Now imagine what's happening inside you if you are all hunched over and you're trying to eat. What's happening to your tube, to your garden hose? It's getting a kink in it, and it can cause you to have issues with the food going down. Not only that, but let's think about you sitting upright. Imagine that you're all hunched over, or even worse, you're on your cellular device. All right, let's imagine that you've got a cell phone, and hopefully it's well away from you and you're not looking at it because, whoa, distractions galore, right? So imagine that you've got a cell phone. How would you normally be looking at your cell phone to be on Snapchat or Instagram or whatever? You'd be looking like this. And if you can see my neck, it is bent down. Okay, put your finger up. Now put your fist over the top of it. Push it nice and down and nice and straight, okay? Now, I want you to pull it forward, putting pressure on. Can you feel the strain you have right here in your hand? Now, this is your head. This is your neck. Did you know that your head weighs 10 pounds? That's a bowling ball. And if your head is like this, you are going to cause yourself issues in your neck. It's an actual condition called tech neck. And what can happen is it can pinch off your nerve supply that is going down. You can get tingles in your fingers. I've had students say, oh, that's why while I've been playing my Xbox too long, I get pins and needles in my hands and my arms go numb. Yeah, that's it, because you've been like this and you've not been, right? So your muscles and your nerves need to have blood supply and flowing, and that's why posture is so important, which is why our musculature, our muscle systems are needed to help maintain our posture so that we have good flow of blood, good breathing, good food, good nerve supply, lymphatic draining, all this. So please, as you're going through this course, make sure you keep an eye on your posture. And if you notice it's a bit wonky, straighten yourself up and make sure it's good. All right, so we already spoke about how when we're cold, we shiver. And that was to create heat, friction. Well, again, that's the point here, is our muscle system helps to help with endothermic regulation by shivering and producing heat, and that helps to warm us up. Okay, let's keep going. The nervous system. All right, the nervous system. This is our brain, our spinal cord, and all of the peripheral nerves, but it's also our other sensory organs like our eyes, our nose, our tongue, our hearing, and the senses in our skin that allow us to feel. So these are our 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, sound, hearing, and sight. With taste, there are only 5 tastes: salty, sour, bitter, sweet, and umami. Umami is the savory taste, okay? Our nose has thousands and thousands of ability to smells, and this helps us to taste. Have you ever noticed that when you get a cold and your nose gets all blocked, everything tastes bland? Well, that's because you can't smell it, and so your taste goes down as well. Pretty cool. We'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the nervous system in depth. So we got our brain, we got all our sensory organs. So what is the point of it? Well, it is to detect changes both internally and externally, and then detect the change, go, oh, we need to respond to this, and then to respond appropriately. So for example, if I held my breath, but then I can't talk. So if I held my breath, right, my oxygen level's going to go down, but my carbon dioxide level's going to go up. And my brain's going to be like, excuse me, that's not okay. We've got too much carbon dioxide, not enough oxygen. Our levels are going out of whack here. You need to breathe. Well, what happens if I'm really stubborn and I'm like, nope, I am going to just hold my breath? Do you know what's going to happen? Eventually, my brain's going to take over and be like, good night, and it will switch me off so it can retake over and it will make me breathe again. Clever, right? Why? Because it noticed that there's an issue going on and I need to breathe. Okay, well, what happens if I put my hand on a hot stove? What am I going to do? Well, the nerves in my hand are going to register that there is pain and that it's hot, and it's going to send signals up my arm, along to my spinal cord, up to my brain to say, hey, this is hot. And then it's going to respond by sending a signal back down to my muscles, and it is going to say, move your arm. So, and I move my hand out the way, and I'm going to vocalize. Most of the time, this is what is going to happen. Why? That is kind of going back to our clan mentality of when we were cavemen, right? We say, because we can then get help, and we can also warn other people that this is dangerous, right? Kind of cool. Let's see. So we're going to detect change. Well, what happens, like we said, this is about movement. We've done internal, but what happens if all of a sudden somebody comes up and goes, boo, and scares me, right? I might have a surge of adrenaline. What is this? This is a hormone. So my body interpreted this as scare. So I might have a fight or flight, run away scenario, because this adrenaline burst is going to come out. This is a hormone, which we're going to talk about more in the endocrine system, which is coming up next. Okay, So it helps to stimulate. Now, I want to tell you very quickly about my niece. My niece, Sarah. She is amazing. And one of the reasons why she is so amazing is because when she was 6 years old, she had a brain tumor. And this brain tumor was on the, let me get this right, was on the left side, right side. I'll get there. Was on the right side of her brain. And it caused her to, it grew really, really big, right? And it caused her to have clubbed hands and slowed speech. And we thought that she was just kind of like not developing as quickly as she should, and she had these terrible headaches, and this lasted for years. And finally she had a terrible seizure, and she was taken away to the ambulance to the hospital, where they did an MRI finally, and they're like, oh poop, she's got a massive brain tumor. So they went in and they operated and they removed it, and she got a little bit better, but they were like, oh, you got to be careful, because she will probably develop this brain tumor again when she's hits puberty. Well, we didn't wait that long. Unfortunately, her body then started to grow it back again, and by the time she was 8, so about 18 months, 2 years later, this tumor had grown back with a vengeance, and it was the size of a grapefruit. So on March 7th, it was a good day because it was my birthday, they went in and they removed the tumor, but they also removed part of her brain tissue. So they scraped out all the cells, so less likely chance for it to grow back. And in doing so, the resultant part was that she became half a CEPA patient. CEPA stands for congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, meaning she can't feel pain at all. She can't feel any sensations whatsoever on half of her body. The other side she can feel no problem, but the opposite side to her brain tumor, she cannot feel at all. So one spring break we went up to visit them, and I, being the crazy aunt, did experiments, and we put ice cubes, and she could feel it and feel it, couldn't feel it. As soon as it went past the midline, she couldn't feel it. Straight down the middle of her tongue, she can't feel from one side to the other. And so her mum would always make her eat some broccoli, and she hates broccoli or anything green, and so she would stick it on the side that she can't taste, chew, swallow, and then all of a sudden the saliva would mix over, and she'd be like, ugh, and she would taste it, but whatever. So there was a time when they were up at Disney, and I was going to meet them, and they called and said, hey, can you bring up a knee brace? Sarah keeps falling over. And I was like, what's going on? She was like, she's walking, and then all of a sudden she's on the ground, and we don't know what's wrong. We're assuming it's her knee. Well, she'd ripped all of the ligaments and tendons in her knee, but she couldn't feel it. She just knew that it was unstable, and she just kept falling over. So she can't actually feel pain. Now, this is because of her brain tumor, but there are some people that are born with CEPA where they cannot feel any pain whatsoever. And anhidrosis means that she can't sweat, and that she doesn't sweat, so she doesn't regulate her body temperature very well. So she lives up in Ohio. And as a teenager, she would think nothing of going out in the snow with shorts, t-shirt and wet hair, because she couldn't tell the temperature difference. And the same thing is, she can't tell if she's overheating too much from too much sun when she comes down here to Florida. So we have to watch her very carefully. Now, Sarah is now 28. She's married. She's got a job. She's a manager at a retail store, and she's got a double degree. We never thought she would even go to high school, let alone college. And she's doing remarkably well, but she still can't feel down half her body. Amazing, right? Now, why do I bring this up? Well, it's because we need to have these sensory receptors. You might think, well, it'd be nice not to feel anything. Wrong, because you need to be able to feel what's going on in your body, because otherwise you don't sit up straight. And so as a result, poor Sarah has got scoliosis, a curvature of her spine, because she doesn't feel half her body, so she doesn't know when she needs to adjust, right? Same thing with if you were chopping carrots and you looked away, she could chop her fingers off and she wouldn't notice until she looked down and be like, oh, I chopped my fingers off. So feeling pain is actually really important. Pain is a great way for our body to understand what's going on and then able to respond to it. So really important to be able to receive information and respond, which is what the nervous system is all about. Okay, the endocrine system, you'll be pleased to know that there is a long list of glands, but the only thing I want you to know is that they control hormones, and hormones control chemical reactions. Okay, I'll say that again. There is a long list of organs, or these glands. They're in the brain, they're in the throat, they're your gonads, the sex organs like your ovaries for girls, testes for boys. Pancreas, very, very important for regulating sugar. What it does is it produces hormones that control chemical reactions. So I was just talking about adrenaline. Adrenaline comes from on top of the kidneys. So right in here, these are your adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys. And so when you get a scare and you go fight or flight, it's those glands there that are producing the adrenaline that will then redirect blood flow to your main muscles like your thighs and your biceps, increase your heart rate, increase your breathing, and make you more focused, right? That's what adrenaline does. Pretty cool. Okay, so again, endocrine system, produce hormones, regulate chemical reactions, lots of little glands. That's all I need you to know. Okay. The cardiovascular system. This is a transportative system. This is going to transport the good, the bad, and the ugly. It is not going to differentiate between what is transported. So let's talk this out. What is the good? The good would be things like oxygen, glucose, macromolecules, micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, okay? The bad, that's going to be our waste. So things like carbon dioxide, extra water. This is all going to get transported around the body and excreted out. The ugly, well, it doesn't distinguish what it's transporting. So let's say there's an infection or cancers. That's going to go all around the body, toxins, and it's not going to stay in one place, which makes it really quite dangerous, right? I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Hunger Games, but in it, Peter gets cut by a big sword, and then you see on his thigh that there is these spider-like marks coming out of the wound. That is indicative that he was getting sepsis or septic, meaning that he was getting an infection that was going into his blood and spreading through the body, which is really, 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 really dangerous, right? Very, very bad to get sepsis. So again, if you get a cut in your integumentary system, very important that you get it clean, soap and water, and treat it if necessary, because you don't want it to go into your bloodstream, because then it travels anywhere and everywhere, and it makes you very, very, very sick. So how does it travel? Well, you've got to have an engine room. This pumping organ is the heart. And then there are 3 levels of blood vessels. Arteries go away from the heart. AA, arteries away. Veins, they point back to the heart. So veins return. So blood is going to go from the heart away in the arteries. They go into smaller arteries called arterioles, and they get into the teeny, teeny, tiny little blood vessels, the teeniest, tiniest blood vessels called, now I'm going to say it wrong for America and England, I can't remember which one's which, capillaries or capillaries. I don't mind which one you say. I say capillaries. I think you're capillaries over here. So these are teeny tiny thin blood vessels that are super thin. Why? Because it will allow for the exchange of the nutrients and the waste between the cells that it butts up against and the blood supply that, well, is inside the capillaries. Then these capillaries merge together to call venules, which are little teeny tiny veins, to veins, and those veins will then return to the heart. And we have this whole transportation thing. Pretty cool. Another transportation thing is the lymphatic system. Now, this lymphatic system is very important for immunity. I want you to think about that for immunity. So the one organ that we need to talk about is the spleen. So if you run your hand down the left side of your ribs just underneath the bottom side of your ribs is going to be your spleen. It's a flat, really red organ. Why is it really, really red? It's because it has a very big blood supply to it. Now, your spleen is going to hold your immunity. So any vaccines or any past infections, the recipe for fighting it is going to be stored in your spleen. Now, this is where it becomes really important to understand that when you wear a seatbelt, it needs to be positioned correctly. You don't want it too high up in your neck because that can cause issues, right? It could cut. Or you don't want it to be crushing on your spleen, because if you get in a car accident, it could rupture your spleen and you might have to have it removed. Can you live without a spleen? Yes. However, you don't want to, because then you're really susceptible to all infections. In fact, you have to take prophylactic, it means preventative, antibiotics on a daily basis if you don't have a spleen. Kind of cool, but kind of crazy, and we want to protect our spleen. The spleen is also really important for helping with filtering blood, and especially as babies and young children. Okay. So the lymphatic system, this, as I said, is involved in immunity. And one of the big things is the lymph nodes and the lymphatic vessels, right, that connect all of these lymph nodes. So when my children were little and they would come and say, Mama, I don't feel very well, I would say, oh, you poor thing. And I would give them a kiss on their forehead. Why would I kiss them on their forehead? Well, not only because I'm mummy and I get to, but my lips are more of a maintained body temperature of me than my hands. I could have been in the freezer rummaging around for dinner for later tonight, and my hands were cold. So if I put cold hands on a forehead, oh, that might feel really hot, and I might say, oh, you got a fever, but in reality they don't. Or my hands might be hot because I've been cooking, and then again I'm like, oh, you're cool, right? No. So my lips are more body temperature, so I give them a kiss, and also because I'm mummy, I get to give them a kiss. And I see if they've got a temperature. And then I will take my two fingers. You do this, right? Put it behind your ears and drag it forward to about where your jawline bends. And if you're sick, you will feel lumpy bumpies in here. Those are some of your lymph nodes, and they're there that boost up our fighting off infections. So if we have an infection, let's say you've got a sinus infection, these lymph nodes in here might be enlarged because they're helping to fight off that infection. But let's say you stood on and cut your foot on some glass or something, and you've got a little infection. These up here aren't going to go and get fight the infection. The ones in your groin are going to get, because they're closer to the source of the infection. Makes sense, right? The lymphatic system not only is involved in immunity and helping to fight off infection, but it also helps to carry certain food molecules and return certain fluids to the blood. So again, transportation, which is why it's really important to see where some of these nodes are. So there is a collection of them under the arm and under the mammary glands, under the pecs, which means that if somebody were to get breast cancer, that these lymph nodes under the arms are going to be looked at, because if the cancer has metastasized, that means it has spread, or the infection spread under the arm and into those lymph nodes, then it has a one-way or a first-class ticket to the whole body, right? It can go all the way around, and then that's how it can travel, which is not a good thing. So making sure that we keep our body healthy, very important thing. Okay. So lymphatic system, immunity, and to help with drainage and for transportation. All right, well, this is my favorite system. Why? Because I know so much about it, because mine does not work. So having been born inside out with a intestinal tract that really doesn't want to work most of the time, I'm very, very familiar with this digestive system, and I hope to one day have a working digestive system. Highly doubt it, but I can live vicariously through teaching you about it. So the digestive system is basically a tube that starts at your mouth and goes all the way through to your anus. And its job is to take in nutrients, to break them down, absorb them, and then to get rid of any waste product. Cool. Well, how is it going to do that? Well, again, it's got to be one really long tube, And then there are 3 accessory organs. What you're going to find out in HSB is there's a lot of things that come in threes. If you can't remember, think, oh, how many threes? Right, it's threes. So 3 things: the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. These 3 here are going to be involved in helping to break down nutrients. Did you just go, wait, didn't you just say the pancreas was in the endocrine system and it's producing hormones to help regulate sugar? Yes, I did. It actually is in both. So it is both an endocrine producing hormones and an exocrine producing enzymes. Ooh, pretty cool words. Okay, so again, the digestive system's job is to take in nutrients, food, break it down, absorb what we want, and get rid of what we don't want. Cool. And it's a really cool system. All right. The respiratory system. Take a big breath. Okay, respiratory system. Now, your nose, mouth, the back of the throat, the pharynx. Look up a little bit. Feel right here. Do you feel the ridgy, bumpy bits? Yep, that's your trachea. That's going to take the air down to your lungs. It's going to fill up your lungs to allow us to get that oxygen in, and then we're going to breathe out that carbon dioxide. Why? Well, cellular respiration. I hope that this is something that is going off in your head. Oh yes, we need the oxygen in order to have cellular respiration, which is why we had digestion also for that glucose that we needed to take in, the oxygen we need to inhale, and then cellular respiration occurs and we break out carbon dioxide that we blow out with our exhale for the respiratory system, and we excrete water, extra water, and then we have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Cool. Okay. So that's basically the point of the respiratory system, is to fuel cellular respiration. Yay. The urinary system. Okay. You might have noticed that we haven't gone in order of Run, Mr. Slice. That's okay. We're kind of like peeling off the layers and we're getting down. The urinary system. This is made up of our kidneys. 2 kidneys. Why 2? Because they're so important. We've got to back up. 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, 1 bladder, and then a urethra. Right, that's how we pee out of. What is the main point of having the urinary system? Well, here's the big be-all and end-all. Do you notice it is in bold? It removes nitrogenous-based waste. Nitrogen. Where did we see nitrogen? Proteins! Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So when a protein gets used up, so our cells get worn down, we used up an enzyme and it's broken down and now we need to replace and repair it. When we've used up all of these proteins, right, they get broken down and we release nitrogen. Well, that nitrogen gets into our bloodstream if we don't get rid of it, and there's hydrogen in our blood, and this hydrogen bonds with the nitrogen, and we've now changed the pH. Changing the pH is going to cause more proteins to denature, releasing more nitrogen, causing more change in pH, and you can see how we've got this catastrophic, cataclysmic, just boulder rolling down of just terrible. So we need to have working kidneys in order to remove this nitrogen. So the kidneys work like a sorting machine. It keeps what we want to keep and gets rid of the waste, gets rid of the extra. We don't want all of these extra electrolytes. Electrolytes is a fancy word of saying salts. Okay. So have you noticed that there is a little caution down there? Do you see what it is? It's Gatorade. Why have I got caution? Why is it only have Gatorade when you're sweating? It's because if you're constantly bombarding your poor body with these extra salts and sugars and electrolytes that your body's not needing because you're not sweating, you don't have diarrhea, you don't have vomiting, right? You're putting extra pressure on your poor kidneys, and there's a potential you might make a kidney stone. And let me tell you, ouch, you don't want one of them. Okay, so what should you do if you want your urinary system to be A-OK, nice and healthy? Drink water and stay away from all of the extra stuff. You don't need to drink Gatorade, not unless you're sweating and you're doing lots of exercise, or that you've got copious quantities of diarrhea and vomiting, right? Then you might need to replace your salts, your electrolytes. But other than that, water is your friend. Okay. The kidneys actually do a lot more than just sorting. It helps to regulate your blood pressure. It helps with maintaining your water balance, and just super, super, super important. Hence, we have two, one for a backup. Okay. Be kind to your urinary system. It is so important. And we've come to our last two systems. So this system here is the reproductive system, but we're going to break it into male and female. Okay, so with the male reproductive system, we can see there's a long list of organs and organ tissues and whatnot, right? Well, most everybody's like, well, it's a penis and testicles and a scrotum. Well, actually, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. There is lots of tubies, and there are accessory organs, like three. I told you the three thing, right? So you've got three accessory organs, and well, why? Because the main point of it is, I'm sorry to just put it like this, but gentlemen are sperm factories. They make sperm, they store sperm, they deliver sperm. That's it. Sperm factories. But the female reproductive system has a lot more going on. Actually, I think the structure of it is pretty simplistic, but it is regulated significantly by hormones, which makes it even more complicated and more difficult, right? So if your hormone levels, the endocrine system is off, then this cycle would be off, and it makes it very difficult for getting pregnant or for lactating or just having a regular menstrual cycle. So what is the point of the female reproductive system? Well, the point is that it is going to release an egg. It stores all of them until they're ready to be released. It releases an egg every month. It aids in fertilization through receiving a penis, receiving sperm, and then letting the sperm meet with the egg. It then implants the embryo into the uterus, which grows and develops for 9 months, the length of gestation, the length of time that we're pregnant. And it grows this baby to full term. And then it's got to get this out of the body. And it's not even done yet. It's then got to lactate and produce milk in order from the mammary glands in order to maintain life of this offspring. So the female reproductive system might be more simplistic in structure, but is incredibly more complicated than the male reproductive system in function and with relation to hormones. Kind of crazy. Okay. Whew. We've done the 11 systems. Well done. But we're not done yet. Keep going. Okay, so if you've made it this far, make sure you take a little break and that you're following that 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, make sure you're looking 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Give your eyeballs a little bit of a rest and make sure you stretch, get some blood flow back, because otherwise it's going to pool all at your bottom and you need more of it back to your brain. So once you've had a good stretch, little exercise, maybe a breath in the sunshine, come back and we'll keep going. Okay, we can do this. We'll keep going. Here we go. So we're going to talk about the characteristics of life very quickly, very briefly. So in order to be considered living, right, you have to have certain characteristics. One of them is that you have movement. So that's, yes, not only am I moving, but I'm also moving internally. So my food is being digested, my heart is pumping, right, blood is going. Even if I was to sit really still, there is still movement going on inside my body. I am responding not only to things outside, so if all of a sudden it gets really hot in the sunshine, I might sweat, right? Or if something comes and scares me, right, I'm going to respond to it. But also, I'm responding internally. So if I'm not breathing enough, my body's going to recognize that and I might, oh, yawn, because that's a response to lack of oxygen or being tired or a number of reasons. Okay, we'll talk more about yawning later. Growth. So you grew from a baby with one head, two arms, two legs, one body, to a young adult, or me as an adult, one head, two arms, one body, two legs, right? Because we've just increased in body size without changing our shape. This is growth. Reproduction. Now, I'm not talking about I have reproduced and I have children, right? I'm talking that everybody reproduces new cells all the time. I forget this. I think it's something like you replace your skin every 2 to 4 weeks, like totality of it. You replace your stomach lining every 2 to 4 hours. So we're constantly replacing. And if you didn't make new cells and reproduce those cells, then it would all slough off. Have you ever done the vacuuming? And we're like, what is all this grey stuff? That's cells. That's body cells, skin cells from you, from your dogs, from your cats, from people that have just come to visit. That's cells. Respiration, right? This is us being able to breathe in and breathe out the nutrients and requirements and ingest the nutrients requirements in order for cellular respiration, because this is what we do. Now, please note, not all organisms require oxygen. In fact, some organisms, if they were placed in oxygen, it would kill them, just the same way as if we humans were placed into just a room filled with nitrogen or carbon monoxide, it would kill us, right? There are some organisms that in the presence of oxygen, they would die, but thankfully not us. We need oxygen, absolutely, and for the purposes of cellular respiration. Okay, keep going here. So characteristics of life continued. Not only is it we've done all of those previously, but we also have digestion. We're going to break down our food that we put into our body so that we can then absorb it, and we're going to put it through into our body so we can then utilize it after we've circulated it around. So assimilation is the utilization of the raw ingredients for our own purposes. So let's break down. If we ate, let's say, an egg that contains a whole lot of protein, some of that protein is going to be broken down into the original amino acids that's going to go into our blood supply. It's going to go around our body to those cells that need it, and those amino acids from the egg that have been broken down to the monomers are going to be re-put together as per the genetic information that tells it to, and we're now going to make it into a protein, a new protein that we need for our own body. So we've assimilated. This word assimilation is actually a really good SAT word. So I have assimilated to the way of life of America from England, right? I have taken on the characteristics of an American way of life, right? Whereas and in assimilation here in terms of the body is it took on the food and it made part of the whole of what it needs to be. Okay, cool word for SATs. And then we also have excretion, which means we're going to get rid of our waste. That's it. Okay, so those are the characteristics of life. Now, here is the big key point. Key point. If we put all of these characteristics together, we are going to get metabolism. Now, metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in the body. We're breaking down substances and building them up. Metabolism, the sum of all chemical reactions in the body. Okay, so now we said, okay, well, we're alive because we do all of these things. But now we have to have maintenance of life, which means that we need to have 5 environmental factors that are going to allow us to keep living. And they're going to be obviously water, food, oxygen, heat, and pressure. And some of these we have to talk about in terms of quantity and quality. So water, essential, right? We really need water. If we don't have enough water, we'll become dehydrated. At first, you might feel a bit icky, you might feel dizzy, and in really rare cases, right, you might pass out, you might have issues, right? It can also cause constipation. It can cause you to look a little dry. Water is so important, right? So we need to have a good quantity of it. If we have too little, we get dehydrated. What about if we have too much? If all of a sudden I was like, you know what, I'm going to drink these gallon jugs of water and I'm going to drink it every hour. Don't do it. But if I was to drink a gallon of water every hour, would that be good for me? The answer is no, right? We need to have a maintenance, because if we drink too much water and we're now out of our maintenance level, we're actually going to cause our cells to go, oh gosh, we're too liquidy on the outside, so I'll put all of my salts out, because, right, to regulate and make it, and then we're also going to put more water inside ourselves, and it's going to go, and it causes us to have an electrolyte imbalance, which can cause you to become very, very, very ill. Sadly, there was a case a little while ago where there was a lady who had a genetic disorder that caused her to have a compulsion to drink water. And she lived in a home where she was being regulated and maintained, so on and so forth. But unfortunately, she had got out, and she went and she found every bit of water she could drink, from puddles to toilets to, we went into Publix, got gallons of water and drank it. And well, unfortunately, the symptoms of having overhydration are dizziness, fainting, feeling unwell, right? Same exact symptoms of being dehydrated. So they called an ambulance. Bystanders called an ambulance for her because she had passed out. And they're like, oh my gosh, she's dehydrated. So they put in 2 large IVs and drained water into her, the saline. And unfortunately, she died in the ambulance because they overhydrated her, and she had a heart attack because she didn't have the electrolyte balance in order to keep her heart going. Oh, terrible, right? So why am I telling you this story? Too little is a problem, too much is a problem. So we want to make sure we have a nice maintained level, and we want to make sure that we're drinking. So the question I'm always asked is, well, how much should I drink? Great question. It's a very simple question to answer. Are you ready? You're meant to drink enough water so that you are never thirsty, and so that your urine is clear to light straw yellow. So if your urine's dark, you're not drinking enough water. If you're thirsty, you're not drinking enough water. Have some more water, right? So there we go. How about the quality of the water? Yeah, that's important. You don't want to drink just plain distilled water all the time, and you certainly don't want to go out to the Benjamin Lake and drink that. Well, right, you need to make sure that your water quality is good. Tap water is great, filtered tap water. Mineral water, fine, right? But you don't want it to be without and be distilled, because again, that can cause issues, and you don't want it to be contaminated. Okay, so let's keep going. Food, again, quantity is an obvious one. If you have too much food, it's going to make you obese, morbidly obese, and cause lots and lots and lots of medical issues, and can cause death. That's why it's morbidly obese, right? It can cause death. And if you don't have enough food, you can be malnourished, or you can suffer from something like anorexia nervosa, whereby you have a mental health disorder, that you have restricted your caloric intake so much that you're burning up your own body, and this can cause a significant problem. Again, electrolyte balances go out of whack. Crazily, 1 person every 62 minutes dies as a direct result of their eating disorder. So again, food quantity is a very important thing to talk about. And we'll talk more about that later. Quality of food. Well, you might like, oh, well, I'm just going to eat McDonald's. Well, you're going to get really sick. Quality of that, not so good, right? But you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to eat kale and foie gras. Well, that's not going to do you any good either. So again, we're looking for balanced, right? We need a little bit of everything. Balance is good. All right, oxygen. For the next few, we're looking, and again, for the other one, consistency, right? For quantity, we're wanting consistency. You don't want all of a sudden to have one breath be nice oxygen and the next breath be nitrogen or carbon dioxide. Well, that's not going to do you any good. You want a consistent level of high quality, but not pure oxygen. By high quality, I mean not full of smoke and soot and pollution, right? We don't want all of that going in our lungs. We want it to be nice and clean. How about heat? Well, you don't want to go all of a sudden from super hot to super cold, super hot, super cold, because your body isn't like, wait, what am I doing? Am I heating up? Am I cooling down? Am I sweating? Am I shivering? And it's going to be too much for your body to change. But why is it that we can live in, let's say, Ohio, where it gets really hot during the summer and really cold during the winter? And the reasoning is because it's a gradual thing, right? Our body can adapt over time slowly, but we want it to be more even consistent so that we don't have this massive, okay, we've got to cool down, we've got to heat up, because again, we are endothermic individuals and we need to maintain pressure. Why do we need pressure? To breathe, and it also helps with blood flow. Okay, if you've ever had it where you've gone up in an airplane or you've gone duck diving down, you may have felt pressure change in your ears, and right, but it's also going to be very important for breathing. If you've ever been to Colorado, or you went to Machu Picchu with a high elevation, you may have noticed that when you first got there you felt a bit lightheaded or you saw stars, right? This is because the amount of pressure is less and it makes it harder for us to breathe, whereas if you've got a higher pressure, it's easier to breathe. Okay, and again, you need the consistency, not all of a sudden high pressure, low pressure, because that would do you no good. Speaking of good/no good, one of the ways of measuring whether or not your body is doing well is by looking at your vital signs. So you may go to the doctors and they may take your body temperature. Well, that's going to be indicative of how well your body is doing, whether or not you've got an infection or not, and it helps to maintain where you are. Your blood pressure, your pulse, how is it? Fast? Is it slow? Is it irregular? Is it right? And your breathing. So are you breathing normally or intermittently or fast, rapid, noisy, right? These are all indicative of what's going on in your body. Also, if you don't have any of these signs, that's unfortunately indicative of signs of death. So no muscular movements and no response to stimuli. All right, well, if you've ever seen somebody like on cop shows or whatever, and that's playing possum, you might have seen that a doctor or a policeman will come along with their knuckle and rub right here. Ow. It hurts. If you're trying to play possum and they get right here, you will react to it because there's a response to stimuli, reflex right here. It's an involuntary response because it really hurts, all right? Don't press too hard there like I just did. If you've ever noticed that in hospital dramas or movies, they're like, oh, this person is brain dead, has got brain death, and so therefore is not alive. What is it they're doing? They're measuring the brain electrical activity. And if there is no metabolic processes, if there's no chemical reactions going on in the brain, they're not going to be picked up, and therefore you've got a flat line. With what measurement? With an EEG. This is an electroencephalogram. Now, this picture is just a cutie patootie, and that's why I chose it. But usually when you get an EEG, they're just going to put little dots all over your head, and it measures the electrical activity. The worst part about an EEG is they use gloop to stick the electrodes into your hair, and it just becomes rather gloopy. But it doesn't hurt. Longest thing about it is getting it all set up, and then they run it for a few minutes and then they take it off again. Why is an EEG used? Well, an electroencephalogram can be used to measure your brain waves to make sure that your brain's functioning, but it also helps to detect things like narcolepsy, epilepsy, if you've got seizures, or it can also be used in things like looking at migraines and how your brain functions. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, now what we need to make sure we understand is the following term: homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of everything in our body to a level that we need, okay? So homeostasis is the maintenance of everything in our body. That means that we keep everything the way it should be. So our oxygen levels, we make sure that we've got the right amount in our body. Our pH of our blood, the amount of nutrients that we want to keep rather than pee out, so on and so forth. All of this is maintained at a certain level, and that's homeostasis. An example of homeostasis is endothermy, meaning we regulate our own body temperature to 98.6 plus or minus zero point 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The endothermy and homeostasis are not synonyms. Oh, no. Endothermy is an example of homeostasis. I want to make sure you understand that. Endothermy is an example of homeostasis, where everything in the body is maintained the way it should be. Okay, I hope you're still doing all right. So take a little break, come back. We've only got a little more to do with this section. You can do it. I have faith in you. All right, stretch. Oh, right, get that blood flow back. Look away. Sunshine, breathing. You got this. Stretch it out. Whew. All right. And when you're ready, come on back. So welcome back. We are now going to talk about the organization of the human body, and we're going to give some labels and terms which are going to be very, very important. So there are two main portions of the body that I need you to know about. If I were to cut off my arms and my leg, I would be left with the axial portion. That's your head, neck, and trunk of your body, right? That's the axial. And why is this important? Because when we talk about the axial skeleton, that's the part that we're talking about is, right, skull, rib cage, vertebrae, so on and so forth, okay? But the parts that were added onto it, my arms and my legs, right, these are the appendicular, the appendages that are added on to the axial portion. So we have four appendages, four appendicular portions, arms and legs, 2 arms, 2 legs. How about this doggy here? How many appendages does he or she have? 5. Why 5? Because you've got a little tail, right? So 2 forelimbs, 2 hind limbs, and 1 tail. That's added on to the axial portion. Okay. Now, because we are a bipedal organism, we stand upright, right? It is really difficult for us to use some of these terms. So I've put this person in a plank and we're going to label positions now. So if we're looking head on, we're looking at the anterior aspect. So head on, right? Imagine that I'm this way, head on, anterior. But going to the posterior is the opposite end, is the butt end. So boink, going that end. So you might have heard, sit your posterior down, right? That's talking about put your bottom in the chair. This is the posterior, the butt end, right? Okay. If we're looking at your back side, we're looking at your dorsal side. So the opposite side to what you can see here. So the dorsal side, right? That is the back side of a body. That's the dorsal. And then the front side that you can see, your belly side, that's going to be the ventral. So these terms are going to be really important all throughout the course. So make sure you know these. Okay, anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral. You'll need to know these, particularly for our dissections and knowing like lay of the land. Okay. So not only are those very important, but they're also going to be helping us to explain some of these cavities. So a cavity is a region in the body that's filled with an organ or organs, and there are different cavities that you need to know about. So on the dorsal side of the body, there are 2 main cavities. You've got your cranial cavity that's going to contain your brain, and the vertebral cavity, which contains your vertebrae, right? And the spinal cord and all of that good stuff. So 2 on the back. Well, let's look at the front. Obviously, the front is the ventral side, right? Because we just learned that. Now, this dude here, I've drawn a line on him to show where the diaphragm is. Why? Because the diaphragm is the key definitive marker between the top cavity and the bottom cavity. So the top cavity is the thoracic cavity, and that is divided by the diaphragm, okay? Below the diaphragm is a region called the abdominopelvic cavity. Now that actually is made up of 2 cavities. So this is the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. Well, The question is there a definitive line for the difference between the abdominal and the pelvic? And the answer is no. Some people say it's your belly button, and I get offended by that. For those of us out there without a belly button, how dare you, right? Whatever. I say about the hip level, okay? So you can go about the hip level. Anything below the hips, that's going to be pelvic. Anything between the hips and the diaphragm, that's going to be the abdominal cavity, okay? So a cavity, again, is going to be something that contains organs. Well, there's a special name for that. They're the viscera. They're any organ within the thoracic or abdominal pelvic cavity, not up here. So if I said to you, is your eye a viscera? You would say no. Is your heart a viscera? Yes. Are your ovaries a viscera? Yes. Are your nose a viscera? No. Is your brain a viscera? No, right? Because not in the abdominal pelvic cavity or thoracic cavity. Okay. Now, there is a word that I really like. I don't know why. I've got some favorite words, and I'll tell you about my favorite words as we go along. But I've got a favorite word, and that favorite word is retroperitoneal. It's just a fun word to say. Retroperitoneal. Retro. So if you're like, let's go retro music, right? 70s music. You've gone back in time. Retro, right? Retroperitoneal means an organ behind another organ in the abdominal pelvic cavity. Really good examples of this, the kidneys, they're way in the back, right? Behind all of the other intestines, or your pancreas, that actually sits behind your stomach. So an organ behind another organ in the abdominal pelvic cavity. Don't know why, it's one of my favorite words, but it is. Okay, so let's, do you see we've got a side view here? We can see the cavities like this. Gives you good understanding. And then front on view, okay? Again, you can see the different cavities. Now, not only do we have cavities in the dorsal and the ventral side, but we also have cavities within the head. These cavities in the head are the oral, nasal, orbital, and then middle ear, also known as otic. All right? So usually I draw a self-portrait at this time and label it. Oh, here's my drawing that I usually draw. Isn't it gorgeous? Doesn't it look like me? Right? So I'm labeling again that I've got the otic or middle ear. Yes, there's a hole in here. Why? To let sound go in. Without it, you wouldn't be able to hear. Optic, these are going to be, or the orbital cavity, these are going to be eyeballs, right? They actually sit in a hole. So if you've got clean hands, you can press underneath your eye and you can feel how there is a bone and then your eye sits inside a socket, a hole. Okay, you got your oral cavity, and then you have got your nasal cavity. Well, it's not just your nose, right? It is your nose, and then it goes up into your sinuses, up here and down here. So that if you ever have a sinus infection, you might feel pressure around your eye in like a mask, and that could be indicative of having sinus pressure and a sinus infection, right? Now, I've drawn a line down the middle, which in blue right here, that says nasal septum. Okay, well, this is what our next term is that you need to know. A septum divides a cavity in half. There are going to be 3 that I want you to know about. So we have obviously the nasal septum. Now, speaking of a nasal septum, it divides your cavity of your nasal system in half, your nose in half. But have you ever heard of a deviated septum? This is where it's not quite straight, but it's one side or another. This could increase the risk of snoring and have a difficulty with breathing. Okay, so that's what a deviated septum means. It's no longer straight in the middle, but kind of wonky. Then you also have in your heart a cardiac septum. And then you have a one in between your testes in your scrotum, and that will be the scrotal septum. Pretty cool. Okay, so 3 septums divide cavities in half. A cavity holds organs in place. All right, here we go. Now, in all of this, you're going to have membranes. Membranes are going to hold the organ in place. It helps to reduce friction, and it allows for the addition of adipose tissue, which is fat. and that helps with protection, long-term energy, and insulation. Very important. We'll talk more about adipose tissue later. In between the membranes, there's a fluid called serous fluid. Yep, I'm serious. There's serous fluid, and it is going to help reduce friction, so it helps with lubrication. Now they've got names for it all, but I'm only going to ask you to remember three things, right? So the first one is the pericardium, and this is the membrane that goes around the heart. You may hear this as the pericardial sac or pericardium, one and the same. If you ever hear of pleura, you're talking about your lungs. There's a membrane that goes around the pleura and the pleural space, the pleural cavity, blah, 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 pleura, lungs. Okay, and then finally the peritoneum, which is around the abdominal pelvic region, right around your intestines, around your guts, so around the abdominal pelvic region. Now, remember how I told you retroperitoneal was one of my favorite words? Well, so is pericardium. It's one of my favorite words. Why? I don't know, but it's probably worthwhile knowing what my favorite words are because I probably use them a lot. Okay. We're getting there. You're doing so well. We got this. Keep going. All right. So let's talk about anatomical terminology now. So if we talk about something in anatomical position, we're talking about it as it would be like this. Standing straight up, that means standing erect, right? Facing forwards, upper limbs at the sides and palms facing forward. So when we talk about something, we want to talk about it where it would be naturally within the body, so in situ. So if I am going to hold, let's see, do I have something? I'm going to hold these Post-it notes. Which hand am I holding it in? Well, where is it? It is in my left hand. How do you know this? Well, you have to kind of put yourself in position of where I am and which way you're looking at me. This is my left hand. How else can you tell? Because my wedding rings are on my left hand and I'm left-handed, and if I was writing, it would be in my left hand, right? So in situ is where it would be in the body. So if I was looking at my brain, I would need to think, okay, which side is it? Well, based upon where it would be in situ, Latin words meaning where it is in place. Okay, so good words to know, in situ. Speaking of good words to know, okay, there is a list talking about relative positions. We know already row 2 and row 3. Anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral. But there's a couple more that I really want you to know, and they're these, right? Superior means above. So my eyes are superior to my nose, but my lips are inferior to my nose, so below. So it's positional. So we'll talk about superior and inferior. So you should know these words, okay? The ones in black are the ones that you really, really, really need to know. Nod, nod, wink, wink. Anterior, posterior, ventral, dorsal, we did those. Medial means in the center. So my nose is medial to my face, but my ears are lateral because they're on either side. Okay, if you wanted to know the other ones, you can, but I'm not going to be too worried about it. Just they're interesting to know. Proximal means closer to the start, distal further from the end. So my shoulder, my acromial, is more proximal, closer to my trunk, than my tip of my third phalanges, my fingertip, right? That is most distal part of my arm, of my appendicular upper limb. Ooh. You noticing we're using the terms? I hope so. All right. Now, if you were to go to a doctor and you'd be like, I've got tummy ache, they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. Now they're going to ask you loads of questions. But if you went in and you said, doctor, I'm having pain in my epigastric region. It radiates down into my right hypochondriac region, slightly into my lumbar region. It's been going on for about a week, and I'm noticing it's getting worse when I eat bacon or I have fatty meals. Blah, 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 blah. The doctor's diagnosed you right away. But if you go and like, oh, tummy ache, they're not going to know what you're talking about, right? They're going to have to say, okay, so where does it hurt? When do you notice this? Da, 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 da. If you go in and you tell them exactly what it is, right? You talk to a doctor, explain it the right way, they'll be able to diagnose you and, more importantly, provide you relief, which is what you need in the first place. So make sure you understand that trying to explain it professionally is an important thing. Now, not all doctors use this 9 square thing. Most of the time, They're going to use this, which is the 4 quadrants: right upper, left upper, right lower, left lower. Now, the one quadrant I really want you to pay attention to is the RLQ. That's the right lower quadrant, because of that little tingly dangly tail. Why? That's your appendix. Now, pain in your appendix, right? We don't know why the appendix bursts, but you guys are prime age for appendicitis. 8 to 21 is prime age, right? Even though my husband got appendicitis at 30, right? He, anomaly, but it's all right. He got his out. He can live without one. I don't have one. He doesn't have one. I just think he wanted to match. But, right, why it gets really bad, we don't know, right? But if it does, and you start to feel pain in that RLQ, don't automatically think, oh my gosh, I've got appendicitis, because you've pulled a muscle, or maybe you're ovulating if you're a female, all right? That could cause pain in the RLQ. But if you've got pain along with malaise means a general feeling of unwellness, right? I don't feel very well. You might have a fever. You might feel nauseated. You've got pain that's radiating. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. Go to the hospital or call your primary up first and say, I think I might have appendicitis. They're going to send you to the hospital to go and get it checked out, okay? When in doubt, get it checked out. But call your primary if you can first. Okay, so that right lower quadrant is something that you need to be aware of. Okay, now we're nearly there. Hooray! Last 2 slides. This might look a little bit... This slide here is going to tell you about the anatomical terminology on the ventral surface. The next one's going to be on the dorsal. I'll show you that in a second. So this is no longer your nose, but your nasal. These are your acromials, axillary, brachials, right? Your umbilical is your belly button, right? All of these things are going to be very important for you to know. Why? Because as I just said, if you have to go to the doctor and be like, I've got pain, you might be able to explain it the right way, and it will help you to get help better and to understand what they're writing. So if they're like, oh, you have chondromalacia patella, and they're like, oh, chondromalacia, I've got soft weakening of the cartilage in the patella, the front of my knee. You've now translated medical talk, right? So it's important that you can understand it as well as to talk it. So this is why I'm going to have you learn some of this and become familiar. This is the back side, okay? This is the end. And quite literally, this is the end of the presentation. So if you stuck with me this long, well done. So this is the back. And again, you've got anatomical terminology that matches the back of you. So the occipital, the back of your head, right? Vertebral, the spinal column. My lumbar is pressed up nicely against the back of this seat with my cushion to give it support, right? The popliteal is the back of my knees. My plantars are planted firmly on the ground because, again, I'm looking at my posture. So I know there are a lot of terms here, but become familiar with them, particularly the main ones, and it's going to help you. So, like, have you ever wondered why it's called lumbar support when you've got it in your car and you can blow up or decrease it in lower back? It's because that's your lumbar region, is your lower back. Pretty cool. Okay, so don't sweat it, but become familiar with these terms, okay? Because this is going to help you with your Sing Your Anatomy project. Ooh, I can't wait. All right, if you need anything, I'm here for you. I think you got it. And if you stuck with me for this long, I'm so proud of you. You're doing so well. And high five again. Woohoo, you got this.